Rodney and his flans. Rodney, shouted Mr. Bodney, the baker. Mr. Bodney dusted the flour from his hands. His son, Rodney, was sleeping in a chair in the kitchen. Mr. Bodney pulled his ear and woke him up. "Listen," he said, "I want you to take 5 sticky sweet flans to Mr. Krabs' shop." "Okay, Dad," said Rodney, yawning. "Is Mr. Krabs' shop on the other side of the river?" "Yes. Now, hurry up and don't daydream or I'll be very angry," said Mr. Bodney. "Mr. Krabs doesn't want these flans tomorrow. He wants them today." "Yes, Dad," said Rodney. "Don't worry, I'll go now." Rodney put the box of flans under his arm and left the bakery. He walked along the side of the river until he came to the wooden bridge. Rodney's mouth fell open when he saw the bridge. It was broken. The middle part of the bridge was in the river. "Now, what am I going to do?" he asked himself. Mr. Crab came out of his shop on the other side of the river. He saw Rodney and shouted, "Have you got my flans in the box, Rodney?" Rodney looked at the river flowing by and he looked at the box of sticky sweet flans. "Yes, I've got the flans here, Mr. Crab," he shouted. "I don't want the flans over there," shouted Mr. Crab. "I want them over here." "I can't cross the river without a bridge," thought Rodney. Then he had an idea. "I'll use the box as a boat," shouted Rodney. "I will float the flans across the river. Get ready, Mr. Crab." Rodney put the box of flans on the water and watched. "It'll be terrible if the flans sink," he said to himself. The flans did not sink. The box floated on the river like a little boat. "Clever," said Rodney to himself. Suddenly, the box started to flow faster down the river, turning around and round. Some ducks jumped into the river and followed the box. They wanted to eat the flans. The ducks made a lot of noise and some people came out to look. The people stood next to Mr. Crab on the other side of the river. "What's happening?" they asked him. Rodney ran along the side of the river. He tried to stop the floating flans. He picked up a stick and pulled the box to the side of the river. However, it was too late. "You've eaten out one of my flans," Rodney shouted at the ducks. "Now I've only got 4 flans left. Dad will be very angry." The ducks swam in the river. They were watching Rodney. What would he do next? Rodney did not know, so he sat on the side of the river and thought. Suddenly there was a strong wind. It was blowing across the river. Rodney had an idea. "I'll sail the flans across the river," he thought. Rodney jumped up and took off his shirt. He used a stick and his shirt to make a sail for the box of sticky sweet flans. The box was quite wet, so Rodney only put 1 flan in it. Then he put the box back on the water. The wind filled the shirt's sail, and the box began to move across the river. Rodney heard a cheer from the other side of the river. A lot of people were standing outside Mr. Krabs' shop now. The dog squawked and followed the box. Very clever, Rodney told himself when the box was in the middle of the river. Then the wind stopped the little boat to stop the sailing, and Rodney's shirt fell into the water. Rodney tried to blow the box across the river, but it was no good. The box floated down the river again. The dogs followed it as fast as they could. "Oh no!" shouted the crowd. Rodney sat down and thought again. He only had 3 flans left now. He looked at the flans. Then he looked at the other side of the river. "It's too far to throw a flan," he thought. "Perhaps I can kick one across. I can try and kick it across the river," he shouted, jumping up. "He's going to kick it," shouted someone from the crowd. Three or four more people came to watch Rodney. Rodney held one of the flans in front of him. He dropped it and kicked it as hard as he could. The crowd was very excited. Everyone shouted and a little dog barked. Rodney kicked the flans very hard, but the flans did not fly into the air. It stuck to Rodney's foot, and pieces of flans flew everywhere. The crowd on the other side of the river laughed loudly. "Oh no," said Rodney. He cleaned a piece of the sticky sweet flans off his body. "I must get the flans across the river without breaking them." Then he remembered his belt. He decided to tie his belt to the branch of a tree and make a catapult. "If I shoot a flan from the catapult, perhaps it won't break," he thought. "Really very clever," he said to himself. He tied his belt to a tree. It took him a few minutes because his trousers were falling down. At last, he decided to take his trousers off. The crowd clapped and cheered when they saw his pink and white striped underwear. When the catapult was ready, Rodney leaned back and pulled the belt back as far as he could. 3, 2, 1, go! Shouted the crowd, and Rodney shot the flan across the river. The flan flew high over the water like a bird. "Look out, Mr. Crab!" shouted Rodney. "Here comes a flan!" This time the flan got across the river. It stayed in the air for a moment, and the crowd waited. They were ready to catch it. When the flan came down, they all ran forward with their arms out in front. "It's mine! It's mine!" shouted Mr. Crab. Then Mr. Crab tripped over the little dog and fell down on the grass. "Oh no," said Rodney, and he closed his eyes. Rodney heard a loud noise. It was the flan landing. Then he heard the crowd cheer. When Rodney opened his eyes, Mr. Crab was sitting with a flan on his head like a hat. "Don't worry, Mr. Crab," Rodney shouted. "There's one more flan. I will get it to you safely. Don't go away." "I can't go away. Look at the crowd. It's so big," shouted Mr. Crab. "I have one last chance," thought Rodney, "or Dad will be really angry." He picked up his treasure and tied a knot in each leg. Then he took some string from the pockets. He began to tie it round the last flan. What's he doing now? Shouted the man on the other side of the river. It's parachute, someone shouted. Rodney is making a parachute with his trousers. Rodney tied the flans carefully to his trousers and put it in the catapult. He leaned back and pulled his belt back as far as he could. 3, 2, 1, go! Shouted the crowd. The flan flew through the air and the crowd shouted, "Ooh, ah!" Then the flan began to fall like a stone. "Look out!" shouted the crowd, and everyone covered their heads with their hands. Some people ran away. Then the trousers filled with air. The legs became as fat as 2 balloons. They swung from side to side and floated slowly down to the ground. The flan dropped gently into Mr. Crab's arms. The crowd cheered more loudly than before. "He's done it!" shouted a voice. 3 cheers for Rodney Bodney. "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" shouted everyone. Everyone was happy because the flan landed safely. However, Rodney was not happy. He turned around and went home. He was very sad. "I have no shirts, no treasures, and I have lost 4 sticky sweet flans. I'm not very clever. What is that it said?" thought Rodney. When he got home, Mr. Bodney was waiting for him at the baker door. Rodney was only wearing his underwear. He felt foolish. He looked down and saw pieces of sticky sweet flan on his body, legs, and arms. "Dad will be very angry," he thought, but Mr. Bodney was smiling. "Mr. Crab just telephoned me," he said to Rodney. "Oh, yes," said Rodney. "I can explain about the flans. I really tried my best." "He wants to thank you for the flan," Mr. Bodney continued. "He had a wonderful morning." Rodney could not believe it. "Why is Mr. Crab not angry with me?" he asked himself. "A wonderful morning?" he asked his dad. "Yes," said Mr. Bodney. "The crowd in front of Mr. Crab's shop liked watching you, Rodney. They bought a lot of things from Mr. Crab's shop." "Mr. Crab is very happy." "Good," said Rodney, smiling. "I did my very best." Mr. Bodney smiled too. He was proud of his son. "Mr. Crab wants you to take 5 more sticky sweet flans for him tomorrow," he said.